presentation of our recent research into the economic impact of COVID-19 on the sports sector across the EU and in the UK. Just to introduce ourselves quickly, I'm Dermot Campbell-Jack, an Associate Director at Ecorys, and I managed this study and worked alongside Anna.
Hello, my name is Anna Kleisner. I'm Managing Director of Sports Econ Austria, an institute on sport economics in Austria, and we were working on the economic impact of COVID-19 on the sports sector.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. So, this is a really important study from our perspective, as it gave us the opportunity not only to examine the economic impact of COVID on the sector, but also to look into some of the measures and initiatives that might help deal with the pandemic. In addition, we looked at the situation across the 27 EU member states, and also we included the UK in our analysis. So as a result, we're able to use this presentation today to provide insight into our general findings, as well as some really specific detail on the UK as well. In case anyone hasn't heard of Ecorys, we're a large social research agency working across the UK, Europe and international markets. We work in a lot of different areas, including considerable work in sport and physical activity in the UK and elsewhere. And that really includes a wide range of work for a number of different clients, so the likes of Sport England and the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in the UK, but also various recent and ongoing studies for the European Commission on a pretty wide range of different areas relating to sport and physical activity. So a quick overview of the background and methodology before we get into the crucial slide showing our findings. The research was conducted in the latter months of 2020 with a real focus on getting concrete information in two areas across the entire sports sector. So including both grassroots and professional sports organisations and sports stadia, retail tourism and events as well. So we weren't just looking at sports clubs. Firstly, there was a need to establish the likely economic impact of COVID-19 on the sports sector as a whole, and also within individual member states and for all the relevant subsectors. Having this data would help the sports sector plan the response to the pandemic and crucially be able to communicate clearly about the likely economic impact, for example, in helping make a case for increased financial support if required. Secondly, the research was developed to map the various measures and initiatives to deal with the pandemic that were being implemented in relation to the sports sector. And this will not only provide the basis for assessing what different approaches had been taken or could be implemented, but also to lead on to us developing some really concrete recommendations of action that could be taken across Europe. So that's the sort of background and methodology, and I'll now hand over to Anna, who's going to take you through about the economic work that she conducted on behalf of SpEA.
Thank you very much, Dermot. Just as the intensity of the pandemic varies globally, so does the degree to which it affects different nations and sectors. The extent to which COVID-19 will affect the sports sector, which covers a variety of sectors, cannot be answered without a detailed analysis. So the first step was to quantify the economic impact of COVID-19 on the sports sector, and we calculated a base scenario for 2020 without COVID-19 that could be used as a benchmark. The most recent results on the economic effects of sport in the EU came from 2012. So the sport satellite account, first of all, had to be extrapolated to the year 2020. A sport satellite account shows the economic dimension of sport in terms of GDP and employment, and it allows to identify economic effects of the European Union, the individual countries, but also on the sectoral levels for each member state. The definition of the sport sector was based on the broad Vilnius definition of sport. In the next step, the sectoral effects of COVID-19 had to be identified for each month and for each country to include the relative importance of sectors and the measures that were taken by the countries. Impacts on the supply side, like the closures of shops or the production sites or cancelled events, were also taken into account as the demand side effects, like the decrease in the sport tourism due to the travel restrictions. To estimate effects, three main steps were followed. First of all, which steps were taken by each member state to fight the spread of the disease? Second, how long were the measures imposed? And third, how were the individual sectors affected by the measures? To account for the insecurities related to the developments until the end of 2020, three different scenarios were considered: a high, a medium, and a low impact scenario. Low, medium, and high relates to the severity of measures taken. For all of those three scenarios, the impact of COVID-19 was calculated, and the calculations were based on a monthly base, and for every EU country plus the UK. Direct effects as well as the indirect effects along the whole value-added chain were taken into account. On the next slide, we see the direct impact of COVID-19 on GDP and employment. On the left side, it's the results for the EU plus UK, and for the UK separately in the second column. The most likely scenario for the year 2020 is the highest scenario, and it estimates that the impact of COVID-19 across the sports sector of the EU may result in a drop of almost 57 billion euro in GDP and the loss of over 1 million of employees. For the UK, we estimate that we experienced the second largest fall in sport income out of all the 28 countries covered. We have 9.5 billion euro. That's nearly 17% of the total decline across Europe in the UK. The sport-related job losses may come up to 250,000 jobs. That's almost 25% of all job losses in Europe. The biggest drop in sport-related GDP and in jobs is going to be expected in Germany. They will lose 22.6 million euro. So the work packages we are going along. The economic impact work package quantifies the short-time impact of COVID-19 on the sports sector for 4 different scenarios: a base scenario, a high, a medium, and a low scenario for over 60 sectors in the European Union and for each member state. We used the Vilnius definition of sports, and we included the core, the narrow, and the broad definition of this Vilnius definition. We differentiated between direct and indirect effects to cover the whole value-added chain. And so we got the full impact that could be expected from COVID-19. We also had an economic survey with more than 100 companies along Europe, estimating their impact of COVID-19, and we were able to calculate multipliers on all the other sectors besides the sports sectors to see what's the total effect in Europe. So I think that's all I can say at the moment to the economic effects, and I can give back to Diarmuid to go on with the measures.
Thanks very much, Anna. That's great. And I think one of the key things is there's lots of detail in the actual report. And certainly anyone listening at the moment, I'd very much recommend having a look through that and some of the great work that SpEA have put into producing all this information for the UK and across Europe in lots of detail. So moving on to have a look at the second work package, where we're looking at some of the measures and initiatives. There were basically three main elements to this work to make sure we had a solid basis for developing our map of measures and also our recommendations. So we started off with some detailed desk research to provide an overview of the measures and initiatives that were in place. We then conducted a survey with over 100 sports organisations or businesses in the sector across Europe to get their feedback on the measures that were developed and as well their initial views on how effective those were. And then what we did was we got some really detailed information on some of the key measures by speaking in depth to 20 stakeholders to get a lot of granular detail about the exact processes that were in place and how certain specific measures could be developed or embedded across the sector to help deal with the pandemic. So our full report talks through about our work on measures and initiatives in a lot of depth, really concentrating on three key areas. So firstly, we developed our map of the different measures and we categorized these into 9 different types as are outlined in the slide. And given the extent of the economic impact that Anna talked through earlier, it's probably unsurprising that a lot of the measures and initiatives that we got feedback on were really focused on financial support. And there's a lot of detail in the report itself about the perceived effectiveness and the ways that these worked. And one of the other sort of main non-financial considerations was about the importance of information and guidance, both relating to finance, but also as well to some of the sort of health and safety requirements around the pandemic. The second main element we looked at was developing a set of 10 individual case studies to highlight particular measures or initiatives in more depth, really so that the sector could see exactly what was being implemented in different areas and how these worked. And these case studies cover various different approaches, such as providing emergency liquidity support for non-governmental organisations in Austria, a range of support measures for the sports retail industry developed by the Federation of European Sporting Goods Industry, and as well as several schemes implemented by the Portuguese Institute of Sport and Youth, including around contractual obligations, communication, support to elite amateur sport. And again, full details are available in the report, and each case study outlines the measures taken, how they worked in practice, and any important results, challenges, or additional considerations. And finally, the report identified 9 important recommendations focusing on how the European Commission and the sports sector can deal with the economic impact of COVID-19. Particularly important was working to make sure that the sector as a whole was aware of available funding streams that they could use, including Next Generation EU, Coronavirus Response Investment Initiative, or the Coronavirus Response Investment Initiative Plus. There was also the possibility of developing a clear plan for sport through any pandemic and recovery phase, either by adapting upcoming plans, for example, the new EU work plan for sport, or potentially the development of separate and bespoke plans for the sports sector. And full information on these recommendations is again available in the report, but we've provided a bit of additional detail here on a couple of the other recommendations. So firstly, one of the recommendations was to embed sport in a range of wider strategies and to encourage cross-sectoral links, building on the existing connections with public health, well-being and the green agenda, helping to leverage funds for other sports organisations, and in particular being able to stress the value of sport in terms of public health and the potential cost savings available through taking a more preventative approach. And secondly, potential strategic oversight to ensure events are rescheduled across Europe as appropriate, benefiting professional sports organisations and linked to subsectors, for example, sports events and tourism. And this would be a fairly complicated task involving coordinating across different levels of events, so local, regional, national, European, up to international, while also accounting for the staged nature of qualification events and as well issues like any pandemic-related travel or safety requirements. So having taken you through the couple of work packages, as mentioned a few times, our final report is already available and can be found on the internet via the EU Publications Office. And it's a very comprehensive and informative report with lots of data backing up some of the key things we've talked you through today so far. It provides the full economic analysis, including explanations of the approaches taken and, importantly, data for the different subsectors of the sports industry, and as well detailed information on the country level, estimating the impact of COVID-19 on the UK and each of the other 27 member states. There's a separate section on measures and initiatives, providing considerable detail on what was implemented and the perceived effectiveness, strengths and weaknesses. And finally, there's a really comprehensive appendix, and that includes some of the country level economic data mentioned earlier, but also outlines some of the analysis approaches taken and includes the individual case studies. Finally, this is a really important piece of research, which we know has already been used widely across Europe to help understand the impact of the pandemic and potential actions. Both ourselves at Ecorys and the team at SpEA are keen to make sure this is used as fully as possible. So please do contact us with any questions about this research or with any more general thoughts. Thank you.